Welcome to the Cabin Culture Podcast, where we spend a little more time diving deeper into all the fun parts of cabin culture. We like to think of this as both the material and imagined expressions of how cabin lovers, dwellers, builders, designers, and dreamers wish to live a more simple and authentic life. I think we have a new first on the pod. We've had a few cabin culture guests on that have experienced Janice's Cozy Rock cabin in person, but I don't think either of us have had the opportunity to visit any of the guest cabins until now. Janice spent the weekend on an excursion to nearby Asheville, North Carolina for a new tattoo and was able to spend the weekend at Little Mountain Aframe, hosted by Shealy, who joins us on the episode today. Her new built A-frame is located in Old Forte, just down the road from Asheville, and has been available to book for only about a month. However, the design and build process has taken up the last few years for her and her husband Eddie. Janice and Shealy touch on all the unique design considerations made from lighting to paint, what sparked the initial idea to build their own escape, and the business approach that supports their dream cabin. Hope you enjoy.
Welcome to the podcast.
I am super excited to be here.
This is such a unique one for me and for those of you listening because I stayed at your cabin this past weekend, which I realized on my way there, I've stayed at so few other cabins since we built Cozy Rock. So it was such a treat. So I have like intimate up close experience with your cabin that we're about to talk about.
I'm so excited to hear about your experience too, because we've mainly just had friends stay there, and I feel like they're going to be, super nice about it because they've seen the whole progression of things. But to have someone else stay there and give me like feedback, I'm really excited about.
Which is so interesting. And I find we've talked about this on the podcast before, but getting honest feedback from guests is so hard. And it comes from such a good place. And also without that feedback, we can't figure out how to make tweaks and improvements as we go. Right. I also need to own up front that it turns out I'm the worst cabin guest ever. I stayed at Shealy's cabin and I went to Asheville to get a tattoo and then proceeded to sleep on her brand new white sheets and get tattoo ink all over them.
It's all good. Seriously, I doubt that I honestly think that's kind of the coolest way to like break in a cabin is that it's like a tattoo related thing because as we talked about, I also have tattoos. I also have bled some ink on sheets before. So yeah, it happens.
Which means I should have known, but I realized I've only ever gotten tattoos that you can wrap. So they've always been wrapped for the first couple of days. This one was like my entire back. And so she was like, I'm not going to wrap it. And I did not think about the consequences on your sheets. Anyway, you handled it like a champ. I'm so sorry. They will be replaced if you decide that you would like to replace them. I did immediately try to wash it out, and tattoo ink, just for anyone listening, does not budge with regular soap.
That's okay. I'm going to try to bleach them here because I've been told that we're not supposed to use bleach on a septic, which is like a whole new thing for me too.
Okay, this is very good to know. I did not know this. I do not clean at my cabin, so perhaps my cleaner knows this, but I did not know that.
This is something my husband has more experience with than me, and he was like, yeah, no, you're not supposed to use bleach at all. Like, okay, good to know.
Yep, definitely good to know. Well, if that does not work at home, Shealy, you better let me know where I can buy replacement sheets because that was the first thing I did when I woke up and saw that. I felt so horrible, and I was like, I'm going to order them right now. They'll be here in the next couple days. Oh my goodness. Okay, but let's dive in. So your cabin is called the Little Mountain Aframe and is in Old Forte, North Carolina. Yes. I happen to know this general area pretty well because we have a cabin in the mountains of North Carolina. For those who are not located in the South or North Carolina, tell us about Old Forte.
So Old Forte, it's interesting because we bought our property probably close to 3 years ago. Yeah, about 3 years ago. And Old Forte has really started to change. I think that anything that's in a close proximity to Asheville has like really started to change. It's very like old mountain town that was kind of sleepy when we first went there. There wasn't a whole lot going on. And now there's restaurants and breweries that have opened up. They have a really cool outdoor scene. They do a lot of like mountain bike activities. Actually, the weekend that you were there, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a one wheel festival going on.
No.
Yeah.
In Old Forte?
Yeah. So when I got there on Thursday, I went into town for something and there were all these people on one wheels and they were having like a festival for them. And that's how it feels every time we go to Old Fort. There's like something going on there, even though it is super tiny.
It is small. It's
It's
like one
really
intersection, one main
yes.
intersection.
Yeah, it is like literally a one stoplight town. They have one grocery store. But it's cool. That was something that we looked for. We didn't want to be somewhere that was very, very busy. We wanted somewhere that we could kind of connect with. And it's funny because in that time, I think we have made more friends in Old Fort than we have in the time we've been in Knoxville. I know way more people in Old Fort. If we go to Whaley, like we know quite a few people there, and it always turns into we go to Whaley Brewing for like a beer, and we end up staying talking to people there for hours. And
then pick up a pizza to take home with you, which we did thanks to your recommendation.
how was it?
Okay, the entire time my friend Emily kept saying like she was right. This is really good. She must have said that like 3 times.
It is shockingly good pizza. It's phenomenal, and they've only been open for like I think like a week.
Really? Yeah, it
Yeah,
was
it's
quite good. But
brand
that's the
new.
beauty of a small town though, because
Mhm.
when we were there, I went to both breweries that were in town. One night I was picking up takeout and I kind of wished I hadn't. I wish I had just ordered it there because I was driving through the town and it was so quiet.
Yeah,
And then I walked into this brewery and it was packed full of
yeah,
people. And this is not a small brewery. It was big,
it's huge.
packed. And I'm like, well, here's everyone from Old Fort right here in this brewery. So I can see how that would be an easy way to get to know people.
Yeah, and actually, Hillman was just voted like I think the best brewery in all of North Carolina on Yelp,
Wow.
which is crazy. And
Okay,
not
I'm
just
super bummed I didn't get a beer. I mean, I did drink the beer that you brought me, but
yeah, that's one of their beers. But yeah, it's crazy to us that it's specifically the Old Fort location, not the Asheville location, that got that like honor.
it had
And
great energy.
it's very cool.
And this makes me wonder because I think a lot of people, when looking for land, like obviously there's the financial issue, right? Like you're looking for a certain amount of land, a certain feel to it for a certain price point. Did you expand your search to a wide area to meet those criteria? Or did you find a town that you really liked and then narrow your search and be a little bit more flexible on the other ones in order to be in that town? How did you approach it?
So our approach to land was we wanted to have space, we wanted to have acreage, and we wanted to be outside of Buncombe County. There's a lot of restrictions with Buncombe County. It's also very, very expensive. That's where Asheville is located. My husband had been camping, I think a couple of times, maybe more than a couple of times, out at Curtis Creek, which is the campground just north of Old Fort. It's part of Pisgah National Forest. And so we were familiar with that area. We just wanted to avoid like big communities and anything that had a lot of restrictions. And she wants to come say hi to me.
My dog is in the background, not only growling, but what is she doing? She is climbing on the counter full of expensive cameras. Hold on one second.
Of course.
Layla, get down. If you're watching this on YouTube, you're in for a treat.
I absolutely love that happened because our dog, who is roughly the same size as Layla, she tried to bum rush the door when I came and locked myself in our living room so that she wouldn't be barking. But yeah, so we knew roughly Old Fort, and we also looked in Mars Hill, which is north of Asheville. We really liked that area too. It's hard to find land that's not difficult to build on. It's not like straight incline.
Yep.
So my husband was the first one to look at this property, and as soon as he was there, he said he knew.
What was it about it for those who haven't been there? Because I have some inkling as to what makes it special, but for those who haven't, like what is so special about that piece of land?
It's really the feeling of it for me the first time I went, and I went when I think he went in November and I went in December. And at that point, like leaves had fallen. There's a really great view that time of year of like looking back over the valley. But what I really liked about it was that the build site was located in a corner of the land. So where we built is like the far right corner, and then the house is oriented towards the rest of the property. So we knew that the damage to the property, like with construction, was going to be super minimal, and then that we would be able to control like the sight line of it, that we wouldn't put these big beautiful windows up and have somebody build like down the hill from us.
Which does feel uniquely important in an A-frame. Not
Yeah.
that I do think a big part of cabin culture is feeling not isolated, that has negative connotation, but feeling a sense of privacy.
Yeah, for sure.
But especially in an A-frame, when you have an entire wall of giant windows,
Right.
the view out those windows is going to be really important.
Yeah, and because initially we actually looked at a different property in the same community, which I say community, you've seen it. It's very tiny. There's like I think 10 houses. Um, we looked at a different lot just down the hill, and it was much much smaller. And the realtor was like, "You should go look at the one that's up the hill. It's at the end of the neighborhood. It's quiet. It's exactly what you're looking for." And we felt really lucky that it was just sitting there. Like
Mhm.
I don't know why it hadn't sold. I know the guy that owned it was not really pushing for it to sell. But for us being able to just like go in the back of an area, have our own space, and the conservation of being able to buy almost a full 7 acres
Mhm.
and never have to do more to it if we don't want to. That was important to us too, because I love all of our trees. I love the natural feel to it, and that we were able to just build in this one side of it so that it felt like we weren't really like intruding very much on what was
Mhm.
already there.
Yeah. And I do feel like one of the things that's really interesting about Airbnbs are that when you're, and I say we're talking about your personal cabin,
Mhm.
but Airbnbs, when you're thinking about visiting one, you look at it online and it's only activating one of your senses. You see the photos,
Yeah.
and that's important. You want to know exactly what to expect. But what information it doesn't give you are the other senses. And I've walked into Airbnbs before, not cabins, but Airbnbs where you smell cigarette smoke, or the stairway walking up to the unit is really disheveled, or you hear a highway. And those things you just can't tell from a listing. And
Right.
what stood out to me the most about being there were the sounds. You're far enough away from, you don't hear any cars, any highways. The only sounds that we heard, like I remember posting a video from the back deck and someone commented, "It's so loud." But they were talking about like the grasshoppers and
Yeah.
cicadas and like those sounds, which are
Yeah.
so special. And then one night I actually was woken up in the middle of the night by an owl who was very close to the cabin, and you could just hear it right there. And
Oh
that
my
was magical.
That just gave me chills. That makes me so happy because I love birds. I yeah, we have heard an owl off in the distance, and I think the only other sounds other than like just nature sounds that you'll hear there sometimes is the farm that's down at the bottom of the hill. You'll hear like the cows and stuff sometimes.
Mhm.
But yeah, the sounds there, it's so peaceful. I mean, and I think it was a few weeks ago now, but like we had lightning bugs and cicadas and everything going. And it was like exactly what you think of as a southern summer, just like
Yes.
bugs, but good
Yep.
bugs.
I will say I opened the loft window to let air in when I first got there, and I forgot to close it, and they don't have screens yet. And we were listening to grasshoppers one night, and I was like, "Okay, that sounds like it might be in the house." And I went up to the loft and found 2 grasshoppers right on the frame of the window, who I safely and carefully transported back outside and shut the window. But I will admit there was something actually magical about feeling like we had grasshoppers coming in to
Oh
join us,
yeah.
and I could just faintly tell that this is louder than it probably should be. Again, I'm clearly a horrible Airbnb guest. I'm working on it for anyone else listening. But
I
those sounds were really unexpected and magical.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. This was our first summer really being able to be up there, obviously with the cabin done, but even when we were up there a lot during construction, but we never really got to be there at night. I think there was maybe
Mhm.
one time where we went where it was pretty close to dusk. Um, and being able to experience that, like that was that was really important to us. We really wanted to feel as removed as possible, but also not lose like we stayed at a couple different Airbnbs in the area while we were looking for property, and I didn't want to be where you have to drive like 45 minutes because you forgot to pick up something at the store.
Yeah. And
And
that
that
is a challenge in the mountains.
yes, for
It's the
sure.
beauty of it and a logistical challenge.
Yeah, that's what I keep explaining to people too. Like when we've had friends go up there, they're like, "Oh, well, there's this hike and it's only like 15 miles away." I'm like, "It's going to take us an hour to get there
Yeah. Yep.
because it's the mountains."
which isn't bad. I'm used to driving that
Yeah.
distance to get to good hikes when we go to our cabin in Boone. And I will say the most interesting rating on Airbnb for that cabin is location. Because
Yeah.
I swear 50% of the people are like 5 stars. This is the most magical, excluded. Like I felt so, alone in the woods. And then 50% are like, well, it took me 17 minutes to get to town. And I'm like,
Yeah.
17 minutes is great. Like you're actually right there.
I mean, anything under 30 minutes was like, perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for.
That's right. That's right. But if you're not familiar with mountains, then that can be tricky because it's just a
Yeah.
lot of windy roads and there's not a lot of direct paths. So that's just how it goes.
Yeah.
Take me back to when you all first started thinking about this dream. Did you and your husband have individual histories with cabin culture and being outside or being in the mountains? Did you develop that together? Because I know you've been together a while. Where did that start for the two of you?
So it's funny. We both, I say I'm from the woods. I am from outside Montgomery, Alabama, and which is way more swampy and like middle of the state. And he's from an area, he's from outside Birmingham where it's a little bit more hilly and a little bit more like rustic. And he always laughs at me and says, I'm from the suburbs. I'm not from the suburbs. I'm glad that I got to put that out there because he's going to be like, "We'll talk about this later."
Now he just needs to listen to this.
Yeah.
My husband hasn't listened to a single episode.
He promised me he would.
Oh, that's sweet. Sean,
Yeah.
do you hear that?
Yeah, no shade, but Sean, get on it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for us, like I grew up playing in the woods. He grew up playing in the woods. I think we both, when we met in college and we went from living in a dorm room to living in an apartment to living in a condo, and we were kind of doing a lot of city living. And we really started wanting more space because of that. But I think that the specific cabin culture aspect of it came from when we got married. We got married in Sevierville in the mountains. Like our whole family and friends stayed in one cabin before we got married. And it was such a magical couple of days for us. It wasn't supposed to snow. It snowed like 10 inches. It was beautiful. And I think that moment of being in the Smokies and experiencing really what you want a cabin to feel like with people that you love, spending time together, having a great time. I think that was the moment that we wanted to have a cabin, but we were young and had no idea. We really, the real plan, I mean, that was the dream. The real plan started about 4 years ago, I think. And we stayed at a cabin and just fell in love. And the whole time we were driving back, all we could talk about was like, well, why don't we do this for ourselves? Like, what's stopping us from doing this for ourselves, which is so naive. And I have like a distinct flashbulb memory of he was talking about what kind of cabin should we build. And he was like flipping through photos of cabins and he turned a photo towards me and it was of an A-frame. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, that's it. Like it was that feeling. I didn't know anything about A-frames. I had never stayed in an A-frame. He had never stayed in an A-frame. We just knew it. We just saw it and it spoke to us. I think the unique architectural aspects of it really spoke to both of us. And we just kind of dove in after that, which is now all this time later seems crazy.
Yeah, but now it's a reality. So it probably feels crazy that it's here, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's where that first step I think is so important and knowing like why you're doing it.
Yeah.
When you all talked about your why, what was the primary thing driving you? What was like, because I know when it gets really hard, you have to have a vision of something. And I like remember the things that I looked forward to. When this is done, we will. What was that fill in the blank for you guys?
For us, it was always the time together was really important. We wanted the experience of all of these other places we had gone and stayed, but we wanted it as our own. We wanted to have a space that we could comfortably take our dogs to. I mean, at this point, when we started planning, we were living in Savannah. We had been there for a few years. And every single free weekend that we could make, we went up there to Asheville, just the general area. And that it just became like this calling to do our own version of it because I felt so sure that we could. And that for us looking at it as it's like it is going to be our forever home. Like we have planned that that will be where we retire to as soon as we can retire to it. And so I think the idea of renting it out was more a like byproduct of not being able to be there all the time than the end goal. The end goal
Mhm.
for us was that it was ours and it was something that was kind of like a compass almost like this is what we're working towards, this is what we're building towards. you know it was all the steps to get there, like always looking forward to like groundbreaking, and then when our windows showed up a year
Mhm.
later and all of that stuff, it was always like building towards it being ours and having the time there together. um that was always really important to us because life is so distracting, and especially like he spent so much time in his military career either away for training or away for deployment or whatever. It was a constant thing for us that this was something that could always bring us back together
Mhm.
despite whatever's going on in the world, whatever's going on in life. And I do think, the world, not to get like super philosophical about it, but at the time that we were planning this, COVID was just really hitting hard. And it felt like we wanted to have that kind of sanctuary sort of place to go to that we could just shut everything out and
Yeah.
be there.
If you're dreaming about a cabin build, or are in the midst of a build, or you just bought a place and are getting ready to host for the very first time, regardless of where you are, sometimes you just need a little help along the way. Shared experiences from someone who's been there, advice from someone who's learned a lot of lessons the hard way. That's me. Or a cheerleader as you finish up. All of these reasons are exactly why I started offering cabin consultations to our Instagram followers and friends who could use some specific one-on-one help. I can't promise to solve all your problems, but I can promise to be transparent about our build costs and process, our organization and project management systems, our favorite and least favorite tools for renting, how we market, and how we found ourselves with almost 80,000 Instagram followers and 100% occupancy in our first year of hosting at Cozy Rock. So if that sounds like it might help you, feel free to visit us at staycozycabin.com or on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and sign up for a time to chat there. Yeah. And this is interesting because you did all of the design of the actual house and the interior design yourself. How did you balance those competing realities, knowing that one, this is going to be our forever home. So I need to design it for us first and
Mhm.
foremost. But two, I know we're going to rent it. And
Yeah.
so I personally know we built very similarly that does impact your decisions. Were there
Oh,
any
yeah.
compromises you had to make because of that? Or where was that hardest for you?
Yeah, so the big compromises were I wanted to pick furniture that I knew would be durable, that I didn't want people to have to worry about, and I didn't want us to feel like we were compromising on the look that we wanted because it would have been easier to get something that was this fabric versus this fabric. Um, some of the areas that I had to compromise, I am a big like vintage thrifted person. Um, I bought a few pieces for the A-frame that did not make it to the A-frame because they're way too fragile. Actually, my computer is currently sitting on one. It's a lovely bamboo and glass coffee table that I had to be talked out of it because the idea of it getting broken, it's from like the 40s, it'll never get repaired type thing. Um, but the design for us was that we wanted it to feel personal without it being something that like I didn't put anything in there that if something happened to it, I would be devastated about, but everything I put in there I loved. And that
Yeah.
was the balance to me.
Yeah. What about the functional design of the house? Is it exactly in terms of, I mean, one of the areas that I was very jealous is you have a lot of closets. So it does seem like you really planned ahead for your retirement in a way that I somehow completely left out of my cabin.
We
So
did
it's,
leave them out at first. We
well,
did.
you caught it in
Um,
time, thankfully. The one in the loft, I opened it. I was like, I wonder what this door is. And then I saw this spacious closet and I was like, oh, I'm so jealous.
that one was my idea. And then we have a closet across the way that has the hot water heater in it. So that's not a very large closet, but it has enough storage for what we need. So I think one of the things that was functional to us was having a bathroom on both floors, because we always wanted to have the loft as its own separate space if it needed to be. So we had to design in the bathrooms. The bathroom upstairs was a huge challenge. It was, I mean, everything when you're designing an A-frame, the floor plan is a challenge, because you think of a room as a box, and nothing in an A-frame is a box for the most
Yeah.
part. And that became kind of an issue just in actually visualizing things. And I had this grand plan of the upstairs loft where the hallway is. I thought we were going to have a ton of space on top of like where the bathrooms are. And there's none. There's like literally none. It's an angle. So
Yeah.
all of the space that I imagined in my head did not exist. So that was when we went back and we added some more closet space downstairs. And we would like to eventually add on to the building to add a little bit more storage space. But for now, I think it's perfect.
Girl, you have a lot of storage space in that place.
It's a lot more than you think. And it was a struggle to find that space, but we managed in a way that I was happy with.
Yeah, you should be proud. Cause I mean, I literally, when I thought about it, cause we met before we stayed there, and you talked about it being your retirement home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was looking at it through that lens, and I was like, they have so much space to store things. This is beautiful.
I've maybe been accused of having not enough storage space for my personal things. I'm something of a hoarder, especially when it comes to like vintage glassware. So that may be a challenge for us in the future, but we'll see.
You have some time to figure that one out.
I may have to tear down my 50s barware collection a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a good question, because I do think, especially in the mountains of North Carolina, the short-term rental market is getting really saturated. If you're just designing for yourself, that doesn't matter at all. But if you're designing to be a rental, there is kind of this need these days to make yourself stand out and feel different from every other cabin in the area or every other A-frame. What personal touches did you put into it? Did you have a vision of how you wanted yours to be different from the beginning, or how did that evolve along the way?
I always knew that like things like the wallpaper in the kitchen, which that was like, I've had a billion samples of wallpaper over the past couple of years. That was the one we stuck with. We went back to it over and over again. I wanted it to have this kind of like natural, sort of Scandinavian, sort of bohemian, sort of cabin-y feel to it, because I think that people react to things that are just a little bit outside of the norm, or just like they have that cozy feel, or it's hard because I'd love to put a label to it, but I just kind of pick things that I like, and I've been fortunate that they've gone together.
Yeah.
I think that our friends were actually really helpful with that, because they've told us over the years when they've stayed at our house, or, you know, when we lived overseas and we had people come stay with us, they would always react to things. And I always kind of absorbed that as like, okay, people respond to, you know, these types of pieces specifically. And so I wanted to channel that with the cabin and make it our own, and not just here's, you know, your typical cabin interior, here's your typical furniture. And I wanted it to feel just unique. And I know that's like a hard thing to put into words. I wish that I had like a unique formula to it, but I just picked things.
Right. Right. I think in this age of Instagram and Pinterest, we're seeing more and more cabins using the same furniture, the same paint colors. I mean, even you're probably seeing this, people messaging being like, what paint color is this? What wallpaper is that? You know?
Yeah.
And I totally understand that instinct, but it does make it harder to create something really unique and feel confident in that unique design, and then not have it replicated somewhere else, which is normal human nature. And we all probably have done that in our cabins. What are the unique, like, can you tell me one or two things that if someone came to your cabin, you would hope that they noticed as something truly unique?
Our kitchen color. I think our kitchen color
Yep.
is super cool and different. It just,
Don't tell people what it is.
I'm not.
You can find photos at Little Mountain Aframe on Instagram, or you can watch this video on YouTube. I'll drop lots of pictures in there for you. But yes, I agree. Your kitchen color is unique.
I was extremely excited that our carpenter told us. He posted a photo of it on his Instagram as well, and he had a client reach out saying that they wanted to do the exact same color, and that to me was very flattering because
I was just gonna ask how that made you feel.
I was so flattered. I was way more nervous about that selection than I ever should have been. I thought it was a little crazy, and I think our builder thought I was crazy because I told him what we chose, and he was like, "Okay, we'll see."
Paint is low stakes, though. You can always paint over if you don't like it. Cabinets,
Yeah.
it's not the end of the world.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. That I think is the big thing. And then I really love our accent wall in the living room, the wood tongue and groove. I think that it's and the beams, all of the woodwork in that house is just that's every time I walk in, I get that feeling. I get that like it's so incredible to see it in person. Um, those are the things to me that I think make a cabin are those little like, especially the wood accents. I mean, you think about a cabin, you think about wood. And it was important to me that we minimize the drywall as much as possible. I wanted to have very, very little. We still ended up with a little bit more than I wanted, but we were talking last night about like in the future, we may add more to the cabin to take away some of that. Um, but I think that those are the things when you're designing a more modern house, being able to pull those inspirations from the past and the wood accents to me were like, it didn't matter how much it was going to cost in the long run. That was important to us was having that.
Yeah. Okay, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about lighting because this is, to me, one of the most important parts of a cabin and creating a cozy feel. And as I told you, and I mentioned on Instagram, this was the first A-frame I'd ever stayed at. And while I've always thought A-frames looked cool, one of the things that pushed me away from them and thinking about my own design was I love cozy spaces. And that giant A in the living room, I was always like, I wonder how that's going to feel and if it will give that kind of like intimate feeling I'm wanting. And after spending 3 nights at your place, I really think that lighting can make it or break it because I sat in your living room every night and felt like your lighting is absolutely perfect. And I still don't think I've nailed the lighting at Cozy Rock because I'm so picky about it. So talk me through. Yeah, obviously you're picky about it because you got it right. Talk me through how you approach lighting, starting all the way at the electrical walkthrough, because I think that's actually where it begins, and it's really hard to picture it at that stage.
Yeah, it really is. It was really challenging for us to figure out how much was too much and how much was too little. We had at one time an electrical plan where we had a little bit more lighting, and we ended up removing, and it was all overhead in the actual peak of the house. So we had like a few more spotlights, I think, that we ended up removing. I am a huge lighting person. Lighting is very important to me. I am completely opposed to all overhead lighting for the most part. It was a fight for me to even agree to a chandelier, let alone pick out one. And I ended up loving our chandelier, so I definitely have no complaints about it. But because I had the same concerns. It's a big open space. I think it's 28 feet wide, 12 feet deep, and like 28 feet tall. I mean, that's a huge space to somehow make feel cozy and not like a cavern. And I read a book it was a design philosophy book where they talked about how the best way to get lighting is to think of it as creating these little islands. And the island concept of like, if you're sitting in a chair and you have one light over you and it just keeps that area like nice and warm, like that I try to carry into the cabin because I felt like at night you can turn on the spotlights because we have 4, so 2 on each side. You can turn those on if you want to make it brighter. You can turn the overhead chandelier on if you want to make it feel a little warmer, or you can just have the lamps on. And the lamps
can also dim the chandelier, which was smart. we don't have dimmers in our cabin yet. Sean's going to do that. But that really helped me figure out, okay, as the night goes on, I'm going to dim it a little bit. And that felt like cozier.
Yeah. I think that the dimmers were, that was one thing that we told our builder at the electrical walkthrough. We wanted every light on a dimmer. I think there's only one, maybe the kitchen pendant lights that are not on a dimmer yet. They might end up on a dimmer.
I can see that.
Yeah, I think we're gonna probably. It's so easy to do.
It is so easy. I don't know why we haven't done it yet.
It's like it has a huge payoff to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it started at the walkthrough. My husband did the electrical plan on top of the floor plan. So he and I talked a lot about where we wanted lighting, where we did not want to have lighting, where we could add lamps. Because to me, it was more important just to have enough that the house didn't feel dark, but like less so we could add in lamps, floor lamps, string lights, whatever. And I think that shows especially in the living room. I think the living room lighting is so just dreamy and all of those feelings. And that was what I wanted. I wanted it to almost feel like candlelight everywhere.
That's what it felt like. Do you know what light temperature or what color temperature your lights are?
I believe they're 2,700.
That's right. I was pretty certain that's what they were, which I think is the perfect light temperature for a cabin. But what I've learned at Cozy Rock is that it's not just light temperature.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the actual fixtures. It's also the color of the bulb. It's also the location and placement. It's the brightness of them. It's whether or not you can dim them. There's so many freaking factors that go into lighting that getting them all right and working together is so hard. That was probably my biggest takeaway from your cabin. There was not a moment where I felt like I didn't have an option to get the lighting just right.
Yeah. Yeah, because even outside, we deliberately did the outside to where you can just do the cocktail lights if you just want the cocktail lights, or you can do just the sconces if you just want the sconces, or if you need to like run outside because you left something outside, you can turn on the overhead bright lights, and I mean the whole place is going to be lit up. So you have the options for us were what we really wanted. And getting that right was really difficult too. We had actually started off with, when construction was finished, we had the hook gooseneck lights out back and out front. And they, for whatever reason, stopped working. And so we ended up swapping them out for the dual-sided sconces so that it lights up the entire peak of the A on the back, and then the same lights on the balcony side. And I mean, massive difference.
Oh, I loved that. Because when I was coming back from getting my takeout that first night, I happened to have my camera in the car, and I stopped, like, not on your driveway, but the lower driveway to get pictures with it behind the trees specifically because of those lights, because you could see it. And it just, the way that it lit up the A was like, reminded me a little bit, this is going to sound so corny, but I freaking love Epcot lighting. It just has a magical feel where like everything is uplit and you're just like, something magical. That's how it felt to me.
It's got that like glow to it. And then I think one of my favorite purchases that we made during construction was our Fox light by the front door. That light was just, that was like one of those things that I could not wait to see that on. That was a big moment for me, was seeing
and
that.
It goes on automatically, doesn't it?
It's just left on. Like, it's just, you can turn it off. But the other light across from it is the dusk to dawn light, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
I just remember walking out and I was like, suddenly it was on, and I was like, it's like you knew that I needed you right now. What is happening? Is the cabin reading my mind? This lighting is like too good.
Yeah.
Okay.
For you.
I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about the rental side of things, because I'm always curious. Everyone, and this is a piece that I like can't emphasize enough to people when I'm talking to them and they ask about the rental side and how much money you make and like how much profit, what are your expenses? Are your expenses too high? And my answer is always, well, it totally depends on your business model and what you need to make this work. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you all figured out what business model you were going to use, what your priorities were, and then how you kind of set it up as a rental to meet those goals?
So the business side of it is definitely more of my husband's brain. He was an accountant before he joined the Army. So he has a lot of like technical know-how when it comes to the actual like numbers and the business aspect of it. But what was important to both of us was we wanted it to be we never looked at it as an investment property. We never looked at it as strictly rental income. For us, we wanted to reach a balance between us using it whenever we wanted and being able to share it with friends and family when they wanted, and then being able to share it with other people. And if that means that every month we're breaking even, I would be thrilled. That is the beginning of our business plan. Was we just wanted to be able to make sure that it wasn't something that was a burden.
Yep.
And being able to share it with other people, like the experience that other people have there, I think that means so much. Just I naturally kind of gravitate towards that. I spent many years in the service industry, and I think as a bartender, it kind of became second nature to me to want people to like go and have an experience and enjoy
Mhm.
themselves and leave feeling like life is great and
Yeah.
happy. Um, and I think that for us as a business, if we can accomplish that and not lose a dime, or even if we like lose a dollar, if we can accomplish that and be able to use it, then we're happy. I mean, obviously making money is always a good thing, but anything that we've made so far, we are going to put back into the cabin. We have There's at least 3 projects I can think of that we still want to do there. I know people think that Airbnbs are all a cash grab, but frankly, they're so expensive that I can't imagine anyone thinking of this as passive income being serious.
Yeah.
It's a ton of work, and we're putting work into it so that we can enjoy it and we can share it with other people.
This is why I wish more people would talk about the finances, not because there's a right or wrong way or that it can't be a viable form of income to support yourself. I think plenty of people do it that way. But I
Yeah.
think it's knowing that there are different models. And so, therefore, you can't just compare your build cost or your rental
Mhm.
rate or your expenses or your profit to just anyone else and then take away some like helpful meaning from that. You have to
Yeah.
first ask that question of, do we have the same goals? Do we have the same business model? And then find ones that might be helpful for you to learn or figure out what you're doing. But
Yeah.
I think with Airbnbs in particular, it's so different. So I'd like to start asking that question more often to
Yeah.
just see how different people are approaching it. And that's
Yeah.
how we started with our first cabin, was the same way as you.
Yeah. And I think that that's what's so fascinating about it is I think there's sort of like a monoculture type of approach to Airbnb that like everybody's doing this because they want to make money. And I think that it's as unique as as each actual stay. Some people are all about their portfolio and making a ton of money, and that's cool if that's what you want to do. I think for us, it was all about the actual A-frame. It was about being able to enjoy it for ourselves. And that was kind of the main takeaway that we always had was how many nights can we keep every month and how many nights can we share with other people, whether it's
Mhm.
our friends and family who like we have I have plans in the next few months for different friends to come stay for free because they need a break. And I think that that's important for people to have too. It's important for us. I'm going there tomorrow to spend a few days so I can work. And I'm really excited about that. Um, and that to me is more important than like, oh, I could have dropped the price and probably rented it out. But there's a cost that comes with that isn't even just financial, like
Yeah.
I don't want to feel like the calendar controls our use of it.
Yes. That was a lesson I learned from Pete because with my first cabin, we never blocked time off for ourselves, or very rarely. We would just see if there was an opening, go up during the week or something. And when I was working on Cozy Rock, he said he knew that it was our retirement home, but he said he gave me the advice of like, make sure you're blocking off time for yourself every
Mhm.
month because you don't want to lose it being yours. And
Right.
if you don't make that a priority, then it does feel like it belongs to everyone else, or
Yeah.
it becomes just about money. And you
Yeah.
can't justify a stay because you don't want to lose that money. But if you block it off ahead of time and that becomes normal every month, a certain amount of days are blocked off for you. So you don't even know necessarily what you could be making.
Yeah.
And that was probably, he gave me a lot of good advice during the build, but that was one of the top 3 best things he told
Yeah.
me that has completely changed how we use it
Yeah.
and why we do our calendar the way that we do it. So that first and foremost, it's ours. So we're going to do the calendar that in a way that allows us first dibs always.
Yeah, and that really inspires me to stick with that, because we had a moment where we kept Labor Day for us, and we had a friend come stay with us, and I'm sure we could have made money off that weekend, but the weekend that we got to spend together and hanging out with our friend was so much more important to me than the financial aspect of it, and which is probably why I'm more of the artistic side and my husband is more of the business side. We balance each other out because I'm like, who cares about money? And he's like, we have to care about money.
Yeah, we have to. But
Yeah.
it's good to have both of those.
Yes.
And I do want to acknowledge that there comes with this a certain amount of privilege if you can ignore the need to make money. But I think we can
Yes.
all kind of agree that if you're building a second home, there's probably some privilege to begin with there. And but I do think it's important to note that, at least for myself, there is some privilege that we can afford to block off on weekend and not have to keep running it. But if you can do that, I do think it's really important.
Yeah, totally. And it is very much a privilege. And it is a privilege that we have made choices throughout our, 14-year marriage that led us to this point of being able to build something that, for us as a second home, as a future home, being able to do that now instead of waiting
Mhm.
until we were in, the later part of our life, like that is very much a privilege that we are aware of and very grateful for too.
And a privilege that honestly I give a lot of credit to Airbnb for. I don't know why I always give credit to Airbnb versus VRBO. I think it's just because I like it better as a
Yeah.
platform.
It's easier to
But
say too. I think
it's
VRBO is
it
fun to
is
say.
I know. Now it's Verbo, which is a little bit easier, but
Yeah.
either way, I give credit. I do feel like Airbnb did a lot for this space and normalizing this, but it allowed people to not have to have that much money just sitting around to invest in a second property, but you can view it as a source of revenue as well to then
Yeah.
justify it and be able to enjoy that experience earlier. So I think, I definitely had privilege in inheriting money that allowed me to invest in my first one, but then I also still wouldn't have had enough money if it weren't for Airbnb to do that too. So
Yeah.
it has created a cool space where people can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, I have some hot topics for you that I'd like to ask,
Yeah.
starting with, what do you think makes a cabin? And do you think that all A-frames are cabins?
Ooh. I think what makes a cabin, this is maybe going to be a controversial answer.
Great.
I think the setting is most important to a cabin. Um, I'm not saying you have to have as many acres as we have, definitely not. But I do think that it needs to feel just even a little bit removed from um, being on top of other people.
Mhm.
Um, I think the setting, and then I think the idea of being able to go there and it be a break, a step away from the world, which is where I think the setting is important. But really, you could definitely channel that energy into a space that had neighbors close by if you just got there and it felt just a little bit outside of like a normal house, like a little bit outside of a place with like a suburban house, I guess. Like, and I don't know, I don't know if it's just the woodsy elements, whether it's outside or inside, but that to me is what makes a cabin a place that you could be with other people and have, or just yourself, and have that disconnect. Because I think the
Mhm.
disconnect is what's really important to us too. We have internet at the cabin, but there was a time when construction was done where we did not, and it was
Mhm.
perfect. I
Mhm.
honestly kind of wish we kept it that way. I had no cell phone service, no internet, and I could just like set my phone down and move on with my day and read a book and have a face-to-face conversation. And I
That
think
sounds
those,
so beautiful, and in my life as an Airbnb host, sounds so unrealistic. The
yeah,
thought of not having cell service makes me so anxious now because 'cause I'm like, "Someone's gonna need something."
yeah. And I could get off on a whole tangent about how I have no cell phone service when I go hiking in the Smokies, and hiking is
Mm.
something I love to do. And so now I'm gonna have to come up with like a backup plan. But anyway, that's a whole thing. Uh, but I that to me, that communal aspect is what makes a cabin. That like connecting with yourself or connecting with the people that you're there with and disconnecting from all of the outside stuff.
Yeah.
That is, when I think of a cabin, that is at the heart of any image that my brain would come up with. And then I guess I know that a lot of people think that A-frames and cabins are separate. I always thought that an A-frame was a cabin. I'm not sure. I know that I personally, when I see A-frames that are not true A-frames and they're like sneaky A-frames, I don't think they're an A-frame. And I'm not going to say who I think that is.
Wait, tell me, just like describe a sneaky A-frame.
A sneaky A-frame would be like if you built a box and then put a triangle roof on it.
Okay.
Like, and there's nothing wrong with that, but
You just don't think you're a purist. You're an A-frame
I'm a
purist.
purist. We
I hear
actually
you.
initially planned our build to where there was no drywall in the actual triangle part. So you could see where the sides and the floor met. And then our builder was like, yeah, we have to have somewhere to run electricity.
Ah, good point. The
So
realities of a not off-grid cabin.
yes. So we were like, yeah, okay, all right, fine. But I do people consider A-frames separate from a cabin like category?
I think it depends who you're talking to. That's why
Yeah,
this is one of my favorite questions. I
yeah.
think I have found no common ground on these.
Okay. I
Oh,
think
no,
an
that's not true.
A-frame.
I found some common ground, but it's complicated.
What's the common ground, do you think?
Location is mentioned a lot.
Mhm.
But what's so fascinating is we went when we were up in Maine with my family and my nephews. One of my nephews named Lucas is 9 or about to be 9. And we went on a road trip trying to find moose. So basically, we convinced the kids to get in the car for like a 4-hour drive just to see moose, which is not inherently engaging for children. So
Sure.
my brother-in-law is brilliant and made a scavenger hunt for them. And it was like a bingo. And he had researched things that we would see and put them all on there. So one of the boxes on the scavenger hunt was a cabin.
Mhm.
And Lucas in the car goes, guys, what's a cabin? And everyone in the car turned to me and goes, Janice, why don't you describe to Lucas what a cabin is? And I said, oh, buddy, this is a big question. And I started by talking about location. And I was like,
Yeah.
it's all about feeling like you're away from the real world and you get to relax and escape the craziness of the real world. And he goes, okay, but how do I know when I see a cabin? And so I was like, okay, I guess there's more to it if you have to actually describe it. He wanted to know, how do I check off this box? How do I see
Yeah.
one? So I ended up describing a log cabin to him
Yeah.
because from the outside, I wasn't quite sure how to give him clear, identifiable criteria
Mhm.
for when he was looking at a cabin versus a house.
And that's something that I've noticed here because we live in Knoxville right now, and there are parts of Knoxville that are older, and you'll see these cabins that are now in the middle of this like kind of suburban sprawl because they've been there for so long. And
Mhm.
when you look at them, like that used to be somebody's old mountain cabin that's now smack dab in the middle of a suburb. And it's like, is it still a cabin? Would that still
Right.
be considered a cabin? I mean, it looks like a cabin to me, but maybe the people that live there don't feel like it's a cabin anymore.
Anymore. And then what about when you and your husband moved to the A-frame?
Yeah.
Now it's not an escape from the real world. It is your real world. So is it no longer a cabin at that point? This is the question I asked myself about Cozy Rock. I'm like, will
Yeah.
it not be a cabin when this is my like every day of the week space?
That's a great question. That's a really interesting question. It would be, I would like to think that I could say later, and hopefully not that long, but later in life, that like I live at a cabin
Yeah.
and I still have, chores. I still have to do dishes and stuff,
Right.
but like I live at a cabin. But yeah, I mean, that's interesting.
And when I think about the origins of cabin culture way back, I don't think necessarily of it as a second home.
Right.
I think of it as people who intentionally want to escape cities, traditional suburbs, things like that, and escape into the woods, not just on weekends, but for good. And I think that created this kind of identity around what does a cabin mean that some of us then began to crave it. Realistically, we couldn't do it all the time. So it
Right.
became a weekend spot. That was really all we could pull off.
Yeah.
But the origins of it, I think of as full-time living.
Yeah, and that's what you see. Like, I do Cades Cove hike in the Smokies like once a month or so, and you always walk by these old log cabins that people like pioneers lived in, and it
Yes.
looked like a cabin to us. It might have been a cabin to them, but it was definitely a lot harder than what our cabins are.
That's
now.
right.
You know, those were more like homesteads that now are what
Mm.
we think of as a cabin, but like I think a cabin and a homestead could be the same thing now.
That's so interesting. Because like back then, when you think about like pioneering out west, and I'm a former US history teacher, and I don't even know if this is right, but like that's what I think of as
Yeah,
most of those houses back then.
for
And
sure.
when did it become? And now, when we think about cabin porn and escapism
Mhm.
on like Instagram, it's a completely different ballgame. It's
Yeah,
like, whose decor is the nicest,
yeah,
who like, it's like all these things that actually aren't about the original cabin culture at all, but that's
yeah.
what we start to identify with cabins. Guilty, I'm not pointing fingers here, like I am for sure part of this, and constantly grappling with it
Yeah,
of how do we keep the feel of a cabin and still make it a nice stay that guests will have everything they need? What is that balance? What is,
yeah,
does a TV belong or not? And you made
yeah.
the same choice we did, which is there isn't a TV at your cabin right now,
No
which does
TV.
yeah, it creates that escape.
Yeah, and it's I wanted it to be where if you really genuinely needed to have a like work situation or a connection situation, you can have that, or you could go there and completely switch off. You don't have to get your phone and connect it to the Wi-Fi if you don't want to. You don't have to stream anything if you don't want to. Because I think that a lot of people believe that a TV is important to where they're going to stay. And I honestly, the first night I stayed there by myself, I thought, oh, we don't have a TV yet. What am I going to do? And I didn't miss it once. I didn't even think about it. I think that when it's removed from you as an option, you really quickly move on from it and don't even miss it. And that's something that I hope people will learn if they open themselves up to it. And not even if they stay at our cabin, but just in general, that if you go into it and realize that there are other things that you can do with your time, that you can truly disconnect. I'm actually about to buy one of those phone lock boxes so that when you
Mm,
stay there, if you want to put your phone in there, put it on a timer, that like distraction and temptation is gone from you and you can
I
go
love
do
that.
something else. Because I need it. Like I'm just as bad. I need to have someone put my phone away from me.
Agreed. And when you're at your cabin, you won't have to worry about Airbnb. The
Yeah.
advantage of only having one cabin, you're there. I
Yes.
remember there was a couple days in August where we were at Cozy Rock. We had also booked Cozy Camp and no one happened to be in Boone. And it was like, I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, I don't have to answer anybody. And I like put my phone down and turned it on silent and didn't think about it. And it was such a treat. I
That
love this idea. I might order a lockbox.
they have them out there. You can buy ones that actually look like jail cells, which I think is really funny. I'm gonna get one that has a timer on it so that I don't have to worry about someone like losing the key to the jail cell and then not having a way to reach me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, because I find myself really craving that that disconnect when I can. I always got that usually from hiking and um, being able to do that and stay at the cabin and just unplug, I think is something that more people could benefit from than they realize.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of hiking, the hike that we did near your cabin nearly was the end of me. I turned around at one point and said to Emily, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to survive this hike.
That sounds brutal. My legs when we did that part of the Appalachian Trail, not the one you're talking about, but up north, it. I hurt for days and
Is
days.
Snook's Nose on the Appalachian Trail?
No, I think Snook's Nose is part. It is definitely part of Pisgah National Forest, the
Yeah.
trail system there.
Yeah.
We are like 45 minutes south of the Appalachian Trail because it
Okay.
mostly runs along the Tennessee North Carolina border.
Yeah.
And so we drove up there one time and did one called Sam's Gap, and I mean it was brutal. It was brutal. I got halfway into that hike and I just thought, how am I this bad? Like how are my lungs this bad?
This is what Emily and I are both runners. Like we run together and we were like, I was like, my legs are shaking on the way up and I can't breathe. And every corner I would turn would just be like another straight uphill section. And I was like, there is literally no break. You climb 1,800 feet in less than 2 miles.
Yeah. Yeah, and
1,800 feet of elevation, to be clear. It
like
was insane.
basically straight up. We have not done Snook's Nose, and I don't think that I'm going to do
I warned people in your guest book, just to be clear.
good. I'm glad because I there's a bunch near there on the Blue Ridge Parkway that I want to do, and some that I've done, some that I haven't done, and I'm gonna pick one out this week to do. But that one, yeah, I look after doing Sam's Gap, which I think was 1,300 in like 2.5 miles. I'm good.
Yeah.
Was there even a view at the top?
So there was, but it was limited because trees are blocking it. It wasn't a 360 view, which is my favorite. And if you're in the mountains of North Carolina, one of the things I love is like you get a view even when you're driving around.
Yes.
You see the mountains. So it was a view and it was good,
Yeah.
but for the amount of work we put in, I will
Yes.
say the payoff was underwhelming. I mean, it's really our fault. And I feel like we identified a little bit of our own arrogance because all of the reviews on all trails were like, this hike is very hard. This hike is very hard. But you never know who's reviewing it. I'm like, is this some like 45-year-old dad with 2 kids who like, had to deal with like carrying a child or something, and I'm like, we've got this. And then we got on it, and the whole way I was like, this is very hard.
I never trust All Trails. All Trails has led me astray a couple of times. And I always assume that if it says moderate, that it's like, it's not that bad. If it says hard, that it's lying and it's like way harder than they make it sound.
Oh, I do the opposite. I hear hard and I'm like, well, I'm pretty in shape. So this is probably more like moderate. We'll be fine. And then we were not fine.
There are some in North Carolina that are just, like I'm really excited to go for a hike this week, but I am going to be really, really picky about it because I can't do, and like my knees hurt, man. Like you hit your 30s and you just like your whole body is like, why are you
getting old? I know. It was unexpectedly hard, but we felt like we earned our delicious lunch and beer in Asheville that afternoon. So it was worth it. In retrospect, I'm glad we did it, but would not recommend for anyone listening. Do not do Snook's nose.
Yes.
Snook's nose.
Don't do Snook's nose. And
it is a tongue twister and it's hard.
It's a tongue twister and it's hard. And did you drive? You had to have taken the Curtis Creek Campground Road up.
Yeah.
Gravel road. Yeah. That road's a lot of fun. We went up to Blue Ridge Parkway and we were up there for a little while. We did sunset up there one night and then we were driving back and my husband was like, oh, let's just take Curtis Creek Campground. It'll get us back into town faster. And cause he had camped up there. And as I was taking it back, I was like, are you trying to get me killed? This road is pitch black. It's gravel. There are people flying. It's like one lane and it is blind curves and it is people flying up the other way. And it was a lot of fun. But when we got to the end, I was like, I don't know that I'm going to do that again.
No. So don't go to that trail. You won't have to drive there again, just for anyone traveling to the area. Okay, Shealy, this was a treat. This was really fun for me because I got to see your cabin and then talk to you about it. I'm going to post a little teaser on Instagram now because folks have seen your cabin this last week and now they'll get a chance to hear a bit more about it behind the scenes. So thank you for making the time.
Yeah, I was so excited to do this. I was so excited to host you. I'm so glad that you guys had a good time there.
We did. We truly did. Yeah.
I can't wait. I can't wait to go read your guest book entry tomorrow when I go over and see the state of these sheets.
Oh my God.
Thanks so much for listening. And if you like what you heard, feel free to leave us a 5-star rating on Spotify or share some of your favorite parts over on Apple Podcasts and a review. If you have any suggestions for guests or feedback, you can always find us on Instagram at Cozy Rock Cabin and the Chalet Frame, spelled CHALA. See you next week. Thanks for joining us.